Diversity is the mixture of different cultures, different people, having an understanding and not really just tolerating people, just understanding them, letting that understanding impact your life as well. That's diversity.
September 11th, a friend called and woke me up out of bed and said, we've been attacked. I spent all morning, getting up out of my chair thinking I'm going to go, sitting back down thinking that's nuts. I decided I was going to go. I was very scared to do that. Got a friend, Eric Bellamy, and convinced him to go with me. 30 hours later, we got to New York. Got to the ferry, got over there, met up with a friend of mine. She lived inside of 14th Avenue, south of 14th. 14th was the first barrier that they set up. And if you didn't have a driver's license saying that you lived south of that street, or you didn't have a press pass, you couldn't get in. And once we were inside that street, we were somewhat committed to being in there, because if we left, we couldn't get back in without her or a press pass. So our first goal then was to go and find wherever the press checked in and get a press pass. So when we got over there, we figured we'd just ask the police, the guards, whoever, and they would point us in the right direction. Nobody knew where the press check-in was. We got pretty close, and I remember we must have been over by the West Side Highway, and there was a flatbed truck, and it came out from Ground Zero, and there were two firefighters sitting on it. And I remember I raised my camera, and I got 2 pictures of them, and then a National Guard came and pushed my camera off my face. Friday was, without a doubt, the longest day we spent there. After, I think it was probably 2 hours of being misdirected to the press sign-in booth, we got to one street, and there was a National Guard, actually a couple of National Guards, and then off to the side there were about 3 NYPD officers. And I asked the National Guard, where do we go to check in? And the guy said, go that way. And I looked at him and I said, no, we're not going that way. We've been that way, and they said to come back this way. And then a New York police officer kind of stepped in between. He said, look, I really think if you just go down a couple more blocks, they're letting people through there. So we went down a couple more blocks, and there was already a very long line of media people standing there. We got in line, and we found out that they were doing background checks on everybody in line. No matter who you were, who you worked for, you had to have 2 photo IDs, passport photo IDs, and you had to have a letter from your company saying that you were on an assignment. Okay, Eric and I didn't have any photos, and we didn't have a letter. I called my editor at People magazine, and she agreed that she would write up a couple letters. That was no problem. So then she said, well, how are you going to get it? I ended up having her fax me the letters at a Chinese restaurant. We got our photos at a 1-hour photo. Made a lot of money that day. And got back in line, and we stood in line for 8 hours. And it took them probably about 15 minutes once we got inside the door to do the background check and give us the official police press pass. And we immediately started walking toward the site, knowing that the press pit was this way. If we were outside that pit, we couldn't take any pictures. And we got pretty close, probably 3 blocks away. You could see the smoke and the rubble. It was a strange smell. We gave up looking for the press pit that night. We were just too tired. I looked over, and there was a firefighter or a police officer standing with a fellow firefighter or police officer in front of the ambulance entrance at the New York University Hospital. And both of them, they had their heads down, and it was one of those moments, just this tragedy starts to become very real and very human. It just seemed like we'd been there forever. It had only been 2 days. Saturday, Eric and I went on in and we found the press pit. The pit was packed with the major networks, camera operators, reporters, magazine writers and photographers. And the odd thing is that you really couldn't see anything from the press pit. And I wasn't in agreement with the way that they would kind of gather around somebody that was leaving the site and start asking them all kinds of questions. We decided that we weren't going to stay at the press pit, that we would head on up Midtown to Union Square. And there was a tremendous gathering of people. There was an artist who had built a flag. He had created it out of metal, I think aluminum and copper, and he was letting kids and adults, whoever wanted to say something, engrave that into the flag, and then he donated the flag to some charity. You know, all along the way, especially Midtown, there were, you know, the signs of the missing persons, flyers everywhere. Bus stops were covered. I remember there was a woman, and she was standing in front of a wall that was covered. It was a bus stop wall, and she was reading all of the flyers. It was really, really hard to read those signs. It's hard to think about those pictures of people that never came home and the families that they left behind. Looking back on this experience, there's a certain anger inside of me that comes from a very complicated source that doesn't really have a face or a name to it. But the fact that something so tragic happened as a result of hate and an inability on the parts of governments and people to live together peacefully. As an American who's never traveled off the North American continent, I only know what I've been fed through the media. And I watched what the media reported and what was fed to people outside of the immediate area. But to realize how much censorship there is disappointing, it's frustrating, it's disheartening, it's depressing, it's reality. You know, my pictures, they're not altered, they're just what I saw. That's what was going on, it's what was real. The hate crime theme has unintentionally become a common thread in most of the work I've done. When I went to New York, I didn't think of it as a hate crime, but this attack was sort of the mother of all hate crimes that have happened in my lifetime. It landed in New York City, but it was intended to hit all of us, and it did. And hatred is a source. And it'll happen again, as long as there's hate.